It was a quiet Friday night when I got the call. The sky was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an eerie shadow over the small town. I had just started my shift at Tony's Pizza, a local joint where I worked part-time delivering pizzas. The phone rang, breaking the silence, and Tony, the owner, handed me the order slip with a puzzled look. "Strange," he muttered. "This address, never heard of it before." I glanced at the slip. The address was on the outskirts of town, past the old Miller farm near the woods. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just someone new who had moved in. Little did I know, that night would haunt me forever. I packed the pizza into the thermal bag, grabbed my keys, and headed out to my old, beat-up car. The drive was uneventful at first, the familiar streets and houses passing by in a blur. But as I neared the edge of town, the roads became less familiar, and the streetlights fewer and far between. The road turned into a narrow, winding path, flanked by tall trees that seemed to close in on me. The further I drove, the darker it got, until the only light came from my car's headlights slicing through the thick darkness. My GPS started acting up, the signal cutting in and out. I cursed under my breath but continued on, relying on my memory of the directions I had glanced at back in the shop. Finally, I saw a dim light in the distance. As I approached, the outline of a house emerged from the shadows. It was an old, decrepit building, seemingly abandoned for years. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the windows were dark, some of them broken. Yet, there was a single light on the porch, flickering like a dying flame. I parked the car and hesitated for a moment, a chill running down my spine. But a job was a job, and I needed the money. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and the air was filled with a musty, decaying smell. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the empty night. I waited, but there was no answer. Just as I was about to knock again, the door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Pizza delivery." There was no response. I took a step inside, the floorboards groaning under my feet. The interior was even worse than the exterior. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. The only light came from a small, dim bulb hanging in the hallway. "Hello?" I called out again, louder this time. Suddenly I heard a noise from upstairs, like footsteps shuffling across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer. I should have left right then, but curiosity and the need to complete the delivery kept me rooted to the spot. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, barely visible in the dim light. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face pale and eyes hollow. He stared at me for a moment before slowly descending the stairs. "You're late," he said in a raspy voice. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "The roads, I had trouble finding the place." He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with those empty eyes. I handed him the pizza, and he took it without a word. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Wait." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. "Would you like to see something interesting?" he asked. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but something in his voice compelled me to stay. I nodded slowly, my throat dry. He led me through the hallway to a door at the back of the house. He opened it, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. He gestured for me to go first. My heart raced as I descended the stairs, the man close behind me. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, all of people who looked terrified. Some of them were old and faded, while others looked more recent. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This," the man said, "is my collection." I turned to see him holding a camera, an old Polaroid model. He pointed it at me and smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Smile for the camera," he said. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to find a way out. But the man blocked the stairs, his smile never wavering. I felt trapped, like a mouse caught in a trap. I had to think fast. "Look, I need to get back to work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I just go, please?" His smile faltered for a moment, and then he lowered the camera. "Very well," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "But remember this, once you leave, you can never come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted up the stairs, not looking back. I raced through the hallway, out the front door, and into my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, but I finally managed to start the engine and peel out of the driveway. As I sped down the dark road, my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What had I just witnessed? Who was that man? I didn't have any answers, but one thing was certain. I would never deliver to that address again. When I got back to the pizza shop, Tony asked me what took so long. I just shook my head and muttered something about getting lost. I didn't tell him or anyone else what had happened that night. Who would believe me? But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I think about that house and the man with the camera, and I wonder how many others have fallen into his trap, becoming just another photo on his wall, and I pray that I never have to deliver to that house again. It was an unusually cold night for late October. I remember it vividly because I was working the late shift at Tony's Pizza, the small pizzeria in our quiet suburban town. It was a Friday, and I was the only delivery driver on duty. The streets were empty, and a dense fog had settled in, making everything seem eerily quiet. The night started like any other. Orders trickled in slowly, and I was able to keep up without much trouble. Around 10 p.m., just when I thought the night was winding down, the phone rang. Tony, my boss, picked it up and jotted down an address. He handed me the slip and said, "Last delivery for the night. Be quick and be careful." The address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, a small, secluded area at the edge of the city limits. I punched it into my GPS and set off. The drive was uneventful at first, but as I got closer, the fog thickened and the streets became narrower. The houses were spaced farther apart, and many of them looked abandoned. My GPS chirped, "Turn right," and I found myself on a narrow dirt road flanked by tall, dark trees. The house appeared out of nowhere, shrouded in mist. It was an old Victorian-style mansion, its paint peeling and the windows dark. I parked the car and grabbed the pizza, hesitating for a moment before stepping out. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my feet. As I approached the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house loomed over me, its broken shutters swinging gently in the breeze. I knocked on the door and waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn back, the door creaked open slowly. A tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a pale complexion stood in the doorway. "You're late," he said in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "Come in." I hesitated. "I'm just here to deliver the pizza, sir." "Bring it inside," he insisted, stepping aside to let me in. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the dimly lit foyer. The air inside was cold and musty, and the floorboards creaked with every step. The man led me down a long, dark hallway lined with old portraits. The eyes in the paintings seemed to follow me as I walked past. We reached a large room at the end of the hall. It was sparsely furnished, with a single flickering candle on the mantel casting eerie shadows on the walls. The man gestured to a table in the center of the room. "Leave it there." I set the pizza down and turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm with a grip like iron. "Wait," he said. "You have to meet my family." I pulled my arm free and backed away. "I really need to get going, sir. "Don't be rude," he replied, his voice low and menacing. "They've been waiting for you." Before I could react, he clapped his hands, and a door on the other side of the room creaked open. A woman and 2 children stepped out. They were as pale and gaunt as the man, their eyes sunken and lifeless. They moved silently, almost gliding across the floor. "This is my wife, Eleanor, and my children, Henry and Alice," the man said. "They've been looking forward to your visit." I nodded nervously, inching toward the door. "Nice to meet you all. I really need to go now." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes fixed on me. "Stay for dinner," she said softly. I can't," I stammered. "I have other deliveries." "Nonsense," the man said, blocking my path. "You'll stay." Panic set in. I bolted for the door, but the man grabbed me, his grip impossibly strong. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. "Don't struggle," he hissed. "It's been so long since we've had company." The family closed in, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. I struggled, but it was no use. They were unnaturally strong, their cold hands gripping me with inhuman strength. Just as I thought I was doomed, a loud crash echoed through the house. The front door burst open, and a beam of light cut through the darkness. "Police! Freeze!" The man and his family recoiled, hissing like animals. 2 officers stormed in, their flashlights blinding in the darkness. They grabbed me and pulled me out of the house, slamming the door behind us. I was shaking uncontrollably as they led me to their patrol car. "Are you okay?" one of the officers asked. I think so," I stammered. "How did you know?" "We got a call from Tony," the officer explained. "He said you hadn't checked in and got worried. Good thing he did." As they drove me back to the pizzeria, I couldn't shake the image of the man and his family from my mind. The officers told me that the house had been abandoned for years, the previous owners disappearing without a trace. I quit my job at Tony's the next day. The memory of that night haunted me for years. Every time I saw a foggy street or an old Victorian house, I felt a chill run down my spine. I never took late-night delivery again. It was a rainy Friday night, and I was stuck on the late shift, delivering pizzas in my small town. The streets were slick, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights, and the constant patter of rain on the car roof was almost hypnotic. I had just finished a delivery on the outskirts of town and was heading back to the pizzeria when my phone buzzed with a new order. The address was unfamiliar, a place I had never been to before. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just a new customer or someone who had recently moved in. The GPS guided me to a part of town that I rarely visited. The houses were older, and the trees lining the streets seemed to close in, casting long, eerie shadows. I finally pulled up to the address, a large, dilapidated house that looked like it had seen better days. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of life inside. A shiver ran down my spine, but I shook it off. It was just an old house, nothing to be scared of. I grabbed the pizza and headed to the front door. As I approached, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, but then decided to knock. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I called out, "Pizza delivery!" But there was no answer. The silence was unsettling. I pushed the door open a little more and stepped inside. The air inside was cold and musty, and the only light came from my phone's screen. I called out again, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty halls. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, a faint sound reached my ears. It was coming from somewhere deeper inside the house. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I walked down a narrow hallway, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. The sound grew louder. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. As I turned a corner, I saw a flickering light coming from a room at the end of the hall. I slowly approached and peeked inside. The room was empty except for an old wooden rocking chair in the corner. The light was coming from a single candle on a table, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The tapping noise had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the candle flickered wildly. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The room was empty, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. My heart was pounding, and my breathing was rapid. I called out again, but there was no response. Then, I heard it. A whispering voice, so faint I could barely make out the words. It seemed to come from all around me, echoing off the walls. "Leave. Now," it said. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Leave, before it's too late." I backed away, searching for another way out. My flashlight fell on a small door in the corner of the room, partially hidden by a tattered curtain. I rushed over and pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With no other options, I descended the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. The basement was even colder than the rest of the house, and the air was thick with the smell of damp and decay. I could barely see a few feet in front of me with my phone's light, but I pressed on, hoping to find an exit. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic. "Leave. Now." I stumbled upon an old wooden door at the far end of the basement. It was covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I reached for the handle, but as I did, a cold, bony hand shot out from the darkness and grabbed my wrist. I screamed and pulled away, dropping my phone in the process. The light went out, and I was left in complete darkness. The grip on my wrist tightened, and I felt myself being pulled back. I fought with all my strength, kicking and thrashing, trying to break free. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and I could feel hot breath on my neck. In a final desperate effort, I managed to wrench my arm free and stumbled back, slamming into the door. The door gave way, and I fell through, landing hard on the damp ground outside. The rain was still pouring down, but the fresh air was a welcome relief. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I reached my car. I jumped in, started the engine, and sped away, my heart racing and my mind reeling. As I drove back to the pizzeria, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. When I finally arrived, I was shaking and drenched. My boss took one look at me and asked what had happened. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. All I could manage was, "That house, it's haunted." I never delivered to that address again, and I later learned that the house had a dark history. It had been abandoned for years after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died there. All I knew was that I had come too close to whatever evil lurked within its walls, and I wasn't about to tempt fate again. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. The cold hand, the whispers, the darkness. It all feels too real to be just my imagination. I've told my story to a few people, but most just laugh it off or say I must have been dreaming. But I know what I experienced, and I'll never forget the terror of that rainy Friday night.